I just always have so many wonderful, endearing memories of how they kind of just helped me throughout school and just, I think me as a person and especially my English language arts people, because I ended up becoming a high school English teacher. And I think
You've led both large multi-district systems and now a single-site rural district. Tell me how that shift in scale shaped your leadership and approach to innovation.
my approach, because again, I started off as a student with an IEP receiving special education services. So my earliest memories are remembering being in a classroom full of students that the school and district really didn't know what to do with.
From my end, we have this little segment where we ask the previous leader to give a question for the one that we're interviewing currently. So, the one question that has come up for you is that in a high performing leadership, there's always a trade off between leaning on your own strengths and relying on the strengths of others around you. So, what does that one trade off look like in your own leadership journey, and how have you navigated that? So, what does it take to lead with both bold innovation and with deep equity? Today, we're joined by Dr. Nicholas Wade, Superintendent of Columbia Union School District in California, and a 2024-25 Google GSV Education Innovation Fellow. Dr. Wade has led systems of all sizes, from multi district networks to his current single site K8 school, and is nationally recognized for work in blended learning, turnaround leadership, and equity focused budgeting. He also serves on California's statewide AI task force, helping shape how schools navigate the opportunities and challenges of artificial intelligence. Dr. Wade, it's a privilege to have you here with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. It's Friday, and again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share, what we're doing here in little old Columbia.
Perfect. Okay. So, we'd like to start the discussion with your journey and reflect on why you joined education and if those reasons still exist.
I always like including this anecdote in every graduation speech that I give, just to show like how you don't know where life can actually take you. Because I remember in high school, my guidance counselor wanted me to go into business. My career aptitude test said I should become a forest ranger. My mom wanted me to become a journalist. And my dad wanted me to have a W-2. I wanted to go to film school. And somehow I became now eventually a superintendent of schools. But I got an education because what really motivated me about all that was like I just always had such a positive relationship with my teachers. Like they were always, I started off in education with an IEP, and just, that was during a time where you kind of were a little bit separate from everyone else. And I just always have so many wonderful, endearing memories of how they kind of just helped me throughout school and just, I think me as a person and especially my English language arts people, and because I ended up becoming a high school English teacher. And I think they are still people that I reference in conversations with my staff and with colleagues. And I think that just shows the type of impact that they still have me decades later, which is great.
So I think out of a lot of options that you had, I think this is, I think maybe where you were supposed to land up, but we love that. We love that for you.
That's what they
So,
keep telling me.
okay. So, you've led both large multi-district systems and now a single-site rural district. Tell me how that shift in scale shaped your leadership and approach to innovation.
It always kind of blows people away, like when they actually ask me about like what's different from like state to state or district to district, and they're always shocked by my answer when I say not much.
Mhm.
They will really because all the different type of variables are at play. You might have maybe a different factor of intensity that's affecting your school or your district, but really as a whole, like I don't think I've had to really necessarily go out and get new tools to put in my toolbox. It's really just kind of like I think recalibrating my approach or whatever that may be. But I think what's really important is that, in all those districts, we've really achieved a lot in a short time frame. And that's always really, I think, how many people comment. They're just kind of always just shocked at how not only were we able to put something into motion, get it in place, but yield some results and it remains there. It's really just like how could that have happened as quickly as it could have? And I think I always try and caution people is like the change I set out doing is not change because I woke up out of bed and decided how could I fill my day. It was something that's based off of what all my particular stakeholders or partners were actually telling me that they felt both real and perceived was affecting their ability to work or their children to be successful, or even the kids themselves telling me how they are interpreting their school day or how they're processing it. And I think when you're able to engage in all those open and honest conversations, um, and really making yourself be this social creature with everyone, you're really able to build a consensus about where we're currently at,
Mhm.
what's affecting us, and what we can do about it. And I think as you're able to really rack up those small wins, and they could be like giving everyone snacks or addressing a Wi-Fi issue or whatever, but it builds faith in that people have in you that you are actually listening and being responsive and acting. And then it kind of builds up that collateral to make, let's say, more sweeping changes to learning and operations, should you cross that bridge.
Mhm. So I think from what I'm hearing, just being there and taking care of the smallest needs does go a long way. So yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense. You often frame leadership in terms of equity, especially budgeting for high need students. So how do you really ensure that innovation and resources truly reach the students who need them the most?
I think what a lot of leaders kind of keep falling into this common trap when they're talking about, let's say, any new type of innovation or the new program or whatever they're going to be thrown into or initiative, they always seem to be focusing really on only like 70 or 80% of the students. And especially if those students are disproportionately placed across a multi-site district, you're really just setting yourself up for like really compounding those issues.
Mhm.
And I think what's always been really my approach, because again, I started off as a student with an IEP receiving special education services. So my earliest memories are remembering being in a classroom full of students that the school and district really didn't know what to do with. So I was in there for a speech delay. But yet I was in a classroom full of, maybe people who had a language other than English, or they were maybe confined to a wheelchair, but that did not fit that typical profile of a student that they were most accustomed to. And that always just that always drives me to ensure that whatever I'm talking about, that it can actually reach all students. I don't think I've ever put something in place that I said it's only going to benefit 10%. And even if there's a feature that might be more prominent for a certain percentage of students, but there's still other tangible facets that come from it that really can benefit the whole population as a whole, or at least have that ability to access it. And I think that's something that leaders just tend to fall into, that when they present, and I always like pointing out or encouraging them, look at the reports or the presentations you're giving and really just add up what's the population you're really like affecting in some way. If I'm talking about reading support, I
Mhm.
should be talking about that that's accessible to all students. How you prioritize caseloads is determined about what's your essentially your entry criteria. What are those multiple measures that are ensuring that you are objective in that process to determine that you are getting the maximum return on investment for that initiative. And I think there's just all those wonderful steps that kind of go into it, that not just planning, but also evaluating. Again, it's greater, like, zone of impact, and I think those are conversations that get lost as time goes on, and it's really ensuring that there's practice that keeps it. And that's something I've always put in play.
Mhm. But I think this comes from a deep place of caring and also being in a place where you can actually implement these changes. So amazing. That's a lovely perspective to have. Also, Columbia Union is piloting the Opportunity Hub and blended co-teaching. How do you see AI fitting into these models, both to expand access and to keep learning?
Well, the Opportunity Hub, for those who don't know, is a blended learning environment where we are now able to offer new programming opportunities to our students, because we are considered in a geographically disadvantaged area, and there's a whole lot of bureaucracy in the state in terms of like, who's qualified to teach certain subjects. Like I have an incredible staff. They want to do everything and then some for all these kids. And but sometimes, they may want to teach a business class, but then somehow, per the state, they don't meet all the different, they don't meet the threshold to really teach that. And it prohibits us from being able to really explore maybe some college and career pathways, world languages, and high school level courses. So we kind of have this thing where we're doing a blended co-teaching piece with Elevate K-12, where then we still have my credentialed staff that are there to kind of help. Again, not just they're not being just common facilitators, but they're really partners in what's transpiring in the classroom.
Mhm.
And I think really the essence of that is about, I think it's in your question, it's expanding access. And I think AI, if you're properly using it, integrating it, you're doing it to make sure that you offer more of an adaptive experience for students that's able to kind of like really, I think, be, I would say, offer real-time feedback to those students. Again, taking in consideration what their voice and what their performance is and helping make like informed decisions about what do those students need or even what they're interested in. So I think it's just yet another piece in the greater puzzle of what we can do to be responsive to clearly the growing and compounding needs of students that is never going to change. So I think it just offers, again, more opportunities.
Hmm. Okay, and you're a part of the California School Boards Association at AI Task Force. So, what is the biggest question school leaders are asking right now about AI in K-12?
I think the one that everyone always keeps going to, because I think it's the most accessible for people to have this conversation. You always go about safety and security, right? Are we protecting privacy and all that? And I think it's easy for people to say it. Now, even though I make that comment, I find it funny that how over time, the last couple of years, people's attitudes towards that question has changed because it used to be the thing that they would die on the hill on that like, I can't consider it because, somehow the data is going to be breached and everything. But the reality is, I think people have become numb to the fact that you can take all the steps that you can absolutely take as a school or a district to ensure that information will be protected, but there's always going to be that risk, right? Power School is a very good example how they had that massive data breach, and I think just in day to day in our adult lives, we're just always getting notified. Some bank or company we're working with, it's out there. I think people have become numb to it, that it's something that they throw out there, but it's not what they believe in. I think what's growing is twofold. One is general use by the teacher or administrator, but then also proper student use. I think the AI literacy piece is taking shape a bit more that's folding into digital citizenship, which is absolutely critical. But the general use piece, I think everyone's still trying to figure it out, meaning how teachers can properly use it to ensure that the classroom environment, how they're integrating it is still making the classroom environment productive in line with our expectations and the greater curriculum framework. But then also, I think it also is exposing that perhaps we don't fully understand our own positions. And if you really want to utilize AI in a constructive way, it doesn't take care of the blind spots, right, that you already currently have. And I think much like when there's any greater trend in education, like when we were doing standards-based grading all those years ago, it really exposed gaps in understanding as well as articulation that was happening within our systems. So I think really what kind of terrifies people sometimes in the conversation is that larger one about what are we truly not doing within our systems that we assumed we actually were.
Mhm. Makes a lot of sense. And I think that connects very well to my next question. That is, there's a lot of hype about AI. AI has also helped us with a lot of things, but there is also significant fear attached to it. So, where do you think AI can genuinely be used to enhance learning? And where do you believe schools need clear guardrails?
Well, I think it's kind of broken up. I mean, the safety piece I know I mentioned, and I think everyone's more than familiar with that. I think that's kind of been, that's been repeatedly beaten. I think but I think it gets into, I think the ethics and the overall teacher use. Like, if we're really to focus on learning, is having students being able to make the proper determination of when to utilize a generative AI tool to assist them in a project. So then it's changing our line of thinking about how are we going to be assessing students knowing that they have access to it. Because always the whole thing is like, well, they're going to plagiarize, so we can't use AI. The kids have been plagiarizing forever. We always know that, like copy and paste from Spark Notes. make it another kid, pay them $10 to write the paper. It's evolved over time.
Hmm.
So that problem is still there. It's just how we respond to it and then put in those proper guardrails to ensure that the product that they're giving us is truly as authentic as it possibly can be from them.
Hmm.
And I think it's really having that conversation about, I think, but I think it's changing the transparency piece because the reality is you can't, you're just so, it's so easily accessible now that it's really trying to get students to be aware of like, the limitations of what it can give you. Like we've had plenty of those conversations here where because we have students provide products day in and day out, that we know all of a sudden when they're coming up with something about quantum mechanics, it's probably not the case if you're not understanding Fahrenheit 451. So it's kind of one of those, I think it's having more of these, conversations, but also having these more formative checks of understanding. But the other piece is the teacher use. We have a tool here called Teach Ally,
Hmm.
which is fantastic. And I think it really does a great job of taking out a lot of the prospect of nonsense that can come out of the product in terms of me asking it to accomplish, like kind of create maybe a particular enrichment activity, unit, or lesson. It's
Hmm.
not going off in 10 different directions. And the rigor is able to be maintained there, and especially within the framework of my greater curriculum adoption, which
Hmm.
is fantastic. So I'm very happy about this. But my teachers have been doing a wonderful job because there is one curriculum that has been adopted before I came that's very much inaccessible to students and teachers. It's not really user friendly. I'm not going to name it.
Okay.
But it's but they've been able to use Teach Ally to adapt it and really modify it that now students that now we're able to, especially in my K2 grade span, that we're able to kind of integrate that content area more regularly than not. So I'd
Hmm.
rather, so it helps with the exposure piece, but it's still within a particular set of rules that
Hmm.
helps even like, let's say we're not having lapses in the vertical articulation of that content area as
Hmm.
they get up to high school and potentially participate in high school level courses.
Hmm. And I think with that, I think many school districts are worried that AI will replace teachers, but you argued that it should augment them instead. So, what does augment, not replace, look like in practice for the teachers in your district?
Yeah, yeah, I always, whenever I'm presenting somewhere, and I always do get that question, and I kind of almost become now just probably too direct, and I say, well, that's just nonsense. Like that's not going to happen. We're not there. We're far from it. And frankly, there's still so many strengths that a teacher, that an in-person teacher gives. Again, that relationship building, and that's always a common thing. But like I think where augment, not replaces, again, it's making them, giving them tools that allow them to be more responsive to the needs and interests of the students. Like, so, right now we also have a couple other support tools, Royo and Think First. One's on early literacy or reading fluency and phonics, and the other one is on math.
Hmm.
And both of them are really yielding new conversations about how our students are really responding to things and even challenging our assumptions with how we've really been historically conducting business. And that's just, I think, a natural piece of, the conversation in the professional learning community about what are we, again, how effective have we been? How have the students been responding to it? And then like, what do we need to change internally to make sure that we're kind of, rising to the occasion? Because we offer a whole bunch of robust services, interventions and supports that is already kind of changing the conversation about what help and to what extent do students need. And we're really finding out, especially with math, our students are far more capable than a lot of the other interim benchmarks have been suggesting. And we've been trying to like also, validate that. And we are, and as we are, we're starting to realize that I think our test scores are clearly not indicative of where the students are really performing at, especially if these support tools are adaptive to their current level of performance. We're seeing them gradually jump up at higher levels. And say what you will, you can't say, well, students are just blindly accomplishing something. They're not. They're engaging with a different entity, almost like a thought partner, and it's really through that conversation we're able to really have a better understanding about how they are processing our delivery of the content. And it's just a fantastic process. And there's a lot in that. And I think that terrifies people. And I think it's like, how can you facilitate that conversation? Well, I find it funny that we always expect students to grow and learn and continue to learn that why can't we? And that is a challenging piece, but it's really becoming more necessary, uh, than is more of a necessity than it's ever been, and it's because of just this new, ever evolving environment that we find ourselves in. But it's absolutely achievable. It's just having a plan that's implemented in a nice, not want to say short chunks, but in a proper scope and sequence, like you would with a curriculum. And
Mm,
it's the same thing that's at play. And if you do that, it's amazing how quickly people become intrinsically motivated.
mm. And I think we've spoken about teachers. This was the piece about teachers. I want to come to students now. So, for students, what kind of digital literacy and AI awareness do you think should be taught in middle grades so that they're ready for the world that they're stepping into?
Yeah, I think the AI literacy component really has to be merged with, again, like the digital literacy and the digital citizenship. Everyone keeps trying to put them in silos, and yet they're too interconnected. And I think that if we're and I always remember this anecdote. I was at a conference a few years ago where they brought in some retired ed tech leaders. They retired in the 90s and 2000s, and I remember when they were asked, what would you have done differently? And they all said the same thing, which is they would not have pushed back as much as they did when the internet was starting to come into schools. And of course, and that stuck with me because I was like telling people, can you imagine where we'd be as a country right now if we had proper digital citizenship in the 90s and early 2000s and how ingrained that be? Now, it probably wouldn't solve a lot of issues, but it'd be a little bit of a different environment than what we're currently finding ourselves in now. So I think like when we're talking about preparing not just the middle grades, but trying to work its way back into the intermediate, you're talking about like their ability to kind of really go through information and the media literacy, understanding and evaluating your resources. And, I'm having that conversation with my oldest. He likes sending me just new trailers of a movie coming up. And it's like, no, that's completely like AI generated. So how do you go back and determine that's not really the actual trailer? I'm excited for the Batman part two, but there's no trailer because they haven't filmed it yet.
Yeah.
And understanding that that creates like algorithms and it personalizes everything to you. What does that say? Where does that information go? What's your footprint and your personal data? And I think it just keeps going on. And in the end, it's really get them to be critical thinkers in their overall use.
Mm,
And and again, like if I was going and at some point down the road, and it will happen,
mm,
that there's going to be like there's a background check on you, just in terms of law enforcement, there's going to be something at some point about what you as an individual is like out there and how they can be able to pull that. And I know that's terrifying a lot of people right now, but that is where it's going. So like, what do you want to be, tied, what do you want your name to really be tied to in some way?
Makes sense. And I think it's better to have our kids prepared to step into the new world that's forming. So yeah, I think we love that. Also looking beyond AI, Columbia Union is piloting enrichment programs, early high school credits, and even exploring a virtual academy. How do you balance ambitious innovations with maintaining strong relationships in small community-based schools?
I think I think it kind of goes back to almost what I was saying in the beginning. Like if you're able to be this open and accessible, transparent, approachable, person,
Mm,
um, I think people need to understand that you are in fact authentic in what you're saying or how you're engaging with everyone. People, even the most disengaged person knows whether or not you truly care about what you're trying to do. And one of the things I always like to tell district leaders is like, in the end, you could have all this experience, all this exposure, all this knowledge, but if you're not willing to act, then why are you even in the chair? And I think when people realize that not only are you willing to engage with them, but then actually follow through on addressing
mm,
real and perceived problems and really being able to kind of like distinguish your district or your school from others in a way that makes people feel proud. I mean, sky's the limit. And I think, we've been able to introduce so much like from all these interventionists, college and career pathways and after school programs and just the behavioral therapy, all these things. It's I don't have torches and pitchforks because people are happy with what they are getting as a result of it, from the staff to the students to the families. And the greatest compliment we had at the start of the school year this year was that after the first day, the comment from parents and staff was, it felt like we just came back from winter break. That means the systems and the environment are in place. People know what the expectations are, and they have faith in all those things. And I think the benefit of being in a K-8 school is that I really like is you can be more in the trenches, right? You're not having a system or process out there where you're kind of delegating it out to different department leaders, right? Or your cabinet. And it's like you can always put in checks, balances, and controls, all that in there. But I think I appreciate me because I'm type A and just potentially OCD. Not, who knows? I think there could be an interesting commentary from everyone around here about that. And they probably wouldn't be wrong. But I like that I can be engaged in that and I appreciate that. So, I mean, I've always taken great pride that no matter how big of a school or district I've had, even if I wasn't on campus, I could still tell you what happened on campus that day. And I think that's something a lot of leaders struggle with. But I always taken pride in that. And here, I like the fact that even if my principal, who's incredibly talented, and I'm very spoiled by having her, Rebecca Wood, so shout out. But you know what? I'm not even if she's leading the charge on one end, but I'm still very much involved in either the different angle or on a different piece of what's happening within school operations. And I just like that. And that's something you kind of miss because you get into larger systems, you're not, and you kind of lose that connection to students and to staff and everything else. So it's just very much spoiled.
Hmm. And I think it's also a little good when you are in the chair and you're also typing, because I'm a psychologist and I know that that's a good thing. So, I mean, I think I love that. Okay, so this is my personal favorite question. So, if I handed you a magic AI tool tomorrow, what is the one K-12 problem in leadership or in learning that you would want it to solve first?
Um, um, because I think man, everyone's kind of looking for something different, right? They wanted to solve the teacher shortage, they want address academic recovery, safety, all those things. I think what would be the most important tool that could come into leadership for K-12 leadership at this moment is something that helps you really truly become not like I think you use the term thought partner, but really like a thought partner in being able to assess like operational and academic complexities within your organization. And I've been playing around with a few potential pilot tools where it's trying to get it equipped, not just in terms of law and ed code and general best practices, but also all the information, a repository of information about your district that you can simply say, like, for example, here's my schedule. I have one retiree. I'm unable to fill this. I want to include a new related services, whatever. Give environments where then you can actually work back and forth when it's still kind of like streamlining all of it, but you're taking what would be hours of conversation with a room full of humans, but then you're able to kind of streamline it where then you and maybe one or two other people, depending on the size of your school or district, you can actually run real-time scenarios and even have it engage with you or have it press back against you about what, again, that return on investment.
Mhm.
And, is your particular initiative really achieving what you set out to do? Looking at performance data, looking at, how money is being spent and just these things that can kind of help you streamline what you're doing. And I think if you're able to really address a lot of those things, I think it really would start serving as a catalyst for you having, I think, more ambitious thinking about what can be, provided to your student population, your staff, and the community as a whole. So I think it gets into, I think it would start there. That would be fantastic to have because then it would just be this domino effect to everything
Mhm.
else. It just,
Sounds like a very brilliant idea, and maybe who knows, something like that ends up coming for real.
I think it's there. It's getting there. I
Yeah,
think it's close by, but I think the moment it is, I think we're going to see a whole different transformation in schools and public ed.
definitely, definitely. Okay, so I think that are all the questions that I had from my end. we have this little segment where we ask the previous leader to give a question for the one that we're interviewing currently. So the one question that has come up for you is that in a high performing leadership, there's always a trade off between leaning on your own strengths and relying on the strengths of others around you. So, what does that one trade off look like in your own leadership journey? And how have you navigated that?
So the question is really more about what I've more or less sacrificed in my journey, or what
How
I've
have you kind of integrated your skills, things that you are good at, and then people who may be good at something else around you, and then integrated that and then navigated that sort of a dynamic?
I think what every cabinet member, board member, um, building admin would tell you that they just really kind of get taken aback by is my ability to spin several plates simultaneously and not really lose sight or panic or whatever. But I think what it also extends to the fact that I'm thinking about several scenarios at the same time, so I'm not as surprised should something occur.
Mm.
And I think that's really served well because then at least there's some potential solution that everyone's been prepped for. And you're not having to waste unnecessary time and resources going back and forth and trying to essentially conduct a potential problem analysis of your particular situation, because that would give you all the different paths to, whatever that conclusion may be, good, bad, and indifferent. And I know that's something that I think has really helped in implementing a number of initiatives that have always evolved from their original scope. And I think it's allowed the ability to open up conversations and people have faith that that's being done again in a way that's not just to be self-grandizing, but really being able to address potential issues head on so we don't have to worry about it and we just focus more on reflecting on the endeavor's efficacy. And so I think like I love how even just adopting a new curriculum, can lead to other conversations about instructional minutes, other types of, deficits that are within the student's learning, professional development, and it's always led to other things such as then, instructional coaches, or then really including, let's say, special education or EL teachers into the conversation. Then they're receiving the same PD, they're getting the same, addressing the equity piece. Maybe our technology is not up to go, but it keeps spreading out, and then it leads to something I think far more robust. But then that again, the impact is incredible as a result of that. So I would say that I'm very confident that's what having just come from a meeting that was similar to that, I would say that's very much would be on everyone's minds is that ability.
Love that. I think that makes a lot of sense too. So I think that is it from my side. Thank you so much for joining us today and then sharing your insights. I think our listeners would learn a lot about leadership and in terms of how we can integrate AI in the best way possible. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, no, pleasure being here. And again, thank you for thinking of me.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. For more information about TomoClub, visit TomoClub or follow us on our socials. Stay curious, keep learning.